Hi, I'm Ross and I renovate homes for living. Join me in the next 20 minutes while we make these traditional style cabinets for a Georgian house. Somewhere in the middle of the video I will be showing you how to make a panel door just by using hand tools, and for those of you who stick to the end I will tell you exactly what the cost of this project was. Hope you enjoy it. So as with any project that involves cabinetry, the first thing that we need to do is build the carcasses. So this is always our starting point. On this particular project we're going to have a painted finish, and in that instance I always prefer to use MDF. I know MDF is a kind of a controversial material because it does get a bad reputation. I don't know why people seem to think it's a cheap and subpar material, but in reality it's a wonderful material. It really depends on what you're using it for. It's fantastic for cabinets, and especially when you're planning on having a painted finish, it paints really well if you know what you're doing. So that's my personal preference as to why I use MDF for painted cabinets. And then once we have the pieces cut up, we can go ahead with the next step, which is assembling the unit. Now on this one I have decided to make two separate boxes because it would have been easier for me to bring it inside that way. You can make it as a one single big box, not a problem at all. However, you'd need two people to bring it in, and I was working on my own, so yeah, I made my life easier that way. Other than that, assembly is a pretty straightforward process. We use a butt joint here, corner clamp, then pilot holes, and then we screw it together. Now all of these screw heads end up either on the bottom where it's not going to be seen, or on the top where it's going to be covered by the worktop. So that's by design, I think. Also the reason I do that is it distributes the weight a lot better, and all of the weight of the cabinet is not sitting on the screws. Instead it's sitting on the bottom panel, so the screws are just there to hold the panels together, but no weight is they're not supporting any weight. That's just my personal preference. And then I've talked in a previous video, I always like to use a 3/4 inch back piece when I'm doing base cabinets. You can clearly see here that I'm doing the same thing. It just gives the cabinet a lot more strength, and then if you make sure that that back piece is square, it pulls your cabinet in square, it gives it a lot more strength. And then I'm just screwing it straight through the back here. Keep in mind none of those screw heads will be seen. This is all going to be against the back wall, so we do not have to worry about them. But this is just a simple and very effective way to assemble your cabinets. And then once we're done building the boxes, we can go ahead and start making the frames and the doors. Now I'm not going to bore you to death with building the other box. It's exactly the same process as the first one. So what we do here is we cut some rough sawn timber. Now these are some rough cuts, so I cut them about 3 to 4 millimeters bigger than I need them, because it's going through a planer, and that's when we will get it to its final dimensions. Now you may notice there's a cabinet above our base units. That was intended to be a bookcase. However, the customer changed their mind. They decided they don't want it there. It really didn't work with the room, I'll be honest with you. It looked alright on the designs. When we put it there, it didn't work with the room. So the customer decided to keep it but put it in a different room. We didn't go to waste, but that's the beauty about having a bespoke made stuff, is that you can make those adjustments halfway through the project. It's not the end of the world for us. So anyways, back to building the frames. So what we do here is we draw some pocket holes for the face frames. Now there's a bunch of different ways we can build up face frames. We can mortise and tenon them. We can use butt joints and just screw them through that way. However, if we do that, we'd have to fill the screw heads. But if we were to use the pocket holes, as I'm doing now, they end up on the back, so we don't have to deal with them in any way. Now in here on our vertical pieces, I was putting some V-grooves, just purely to match it with some of the details on the fireplace. That's why I said it was loosely based on a Georgian style joinery. So what I'm doing here now is I've got my 1/4 inch router set up with a V-groove piece, and then a parallel fence, and then I'm using the legs of my clamps as the stoppers, so I can get a repeat cuts and make sure all of my grooves are the same length. Once we have all of our pieces ready, we can go ahead and assemble the frame. You can see me using the pocket holes that we drilled earlier to connect my pieces together. I'm also using a small amount of wood glue that gives the joint a little bit more strength. And then after that, it's a pretty straightforward process. Now on the smaller frames, what I like to do is put them in a sash clamp. That way when I'm driving my screws through the pocket holes, my pieces are not pushed apart. However, this one was quite a big frame, as you can see here. I did not have a clamp big enough for that, but that's not a problem. I just clamped my pieces with an F clamp to my bench. And then once we have the frame assembled, we need to put the middle piece, which is a very simple process. We have to find the center of our frame, find the center of our middle piece, and just align them together. Then we use the same pocket holes and drive 4 screws and we have it connected. We always check the frame is square. And then what I like to do now is before I install it, I would sand it down. On the back I would only go with 80 grit, doesn't need to be any finer than that, none of that is going to be seen. On the front I will go down to 120, possibly 240 depending on the quality of the timber. And then we get to the real fun part, which is making the panel doors by hand. Now I've decided to do that on this project because I can, but also because I don't get to use my hand tools as much as I'd like to. So whenever an opportunity presents itself, I'd like to take it. What I'm doing here now is I'm marking the position of our rib cuts. Now this is oversized because again we'd have to plane that to size. I'm oversizing it by about 3 to 4 millimeters again. And then we onto the jointer plane. Now this is my mid-1800s jointer plane, and I like it better than the relatively modern metal planes because it's not as heavy, so it doesn't tire your arms as much in the long run. We're using this tool to get our boards straight and cut them pretty much to size. After I'm done with this tool, I would go over with my number 4 smoothing plane, which is one of my favorite planes to use, but when we need to have a straight flat surface, this is my go-ahead tool. And then you can see me here switching to the number 4 smoothing plane, taking a few more shavings, making sure everything's nice and flat, and then periodically we'd have to measure our thickness. I like to use my caliper here. As you can see, this is my final pass. I'm happy with the thickness, so I can go over the edges. Again, we start with the jointer plane. That means that we can have a straight edge. After that I would switch to the number 4 smoothing plane, slowly bringing everything to square, and then I'll do a couple of passes with the block plane, just easy to control. We got to make sure that this edge is absolutely straight and square, as you can see here, dead on. If the camera would focus, yes. I was very happy with that edge. And then once we have one side straight and square, we can go ahead and bring our whole piece to size. So what I'm doing here now is I'm transferring my final dimension to both sides with my combi square. Then I will do a few passes with my jointer plane, take the bulk of the material down. After that I would switch to my number 4 smoothing plane, making sure that I get to the line, and again I'd need to make sure that the edge is square to the piece. So this is exactly what I'm doing now here. I'm checking. There was a couple of bits that weren't perfectly square, so I had to go over and do a few passes with the little block plane. Whenever we're making a panel door, a groove is paramount because that's where our middle panel sits. So the traditional way we cut our groove is by using a plow plane, as you can see here. When using one, you got to remember you start from the end of the piece and then you work your way backwards. That way you don't remove too much material and ruin your piece. So once we have the groove cut on all of our pieces, we can go ahead and mark our positions for our mortise and tenons. And then we cut our stiles and rails. The stiles, we leave them a bit longer. You'll see in a second why. The rails, we cut them to size. As you can see here, I was very happy with that cut. That was straight from the saw, perfectly square on both sides. So we do a bunch more cuts like that to get our couple of rails, top and bottom. So that's 2 rails per door, and after that we can start cutting the tenons. The easiest way to mark our position for the tenons is to have a marking gauge set up at the same distance. In this particular case that was 25mm. Then I'm using a technique that I've learned from Paul Seller. He calls it the knife wall. Great way to make sure that your cut is 100% accurate. Go ahead and watch his video. He explains it a lot better, so I'm not going to take credit for that. So we do that on both sides, and then we get to cut the tenons. Now, just like my dovetails, when I'm doing a mortise and tenon joint, I like to cut my tenon fat, and what that means is that I leave it slightly oversized. Then after that I'll be using a router plane to shave it to size, making sure that we have a nice and tight fit into the mortise. It's a bit of a time consuming process because you have to do that on every single joint, but that way you can ensure that you have a proper fit on all of them. And then what we're doing here is we have to cut a little notch in our tenon, which is essentially from the edge of the stile to the beginning of the mortise. Then after that we can transfer the position of our tenon to the mortise piece, clamp it into the vise, and actually start cutting the mortises. That is a quite simple process. So we're using a 6mm chisel that fits just perfectly into the 6mm groove that we cut earlier with the plow plane. Now if your plow plane has been set up properly, you should have a perfectly parallel groove. What that means is that you should be able to use your groove as a guide to make sure that your mortise is perfectly parallel until you reach the desired depth. Now keep in mind this is only a shallow mortise, about 25mm deep. There's another thing that I'm doing here is I have my combi square set up at 25mm, and I'm using it to check my depth. So essentially when my combi square stops touching the bottom of my mortise, that's when I know that I've reached the desired depth. And this is what our mortise looks like. Then the next step would be to shave our tenon so we can have a joint that fits together. So I'm using my router plane here. I have spoken about it in a previous video. The process here is I would have the router plane set up, and then I would do the piece one end, flip it over, do it on the other end, and then keep doing that until I get a fit. The reason for that is I want to make sure that that tenon is perfectly in the middle of my piece. Let's just break the edges here, and this is what our joint looks like. Do it 3 more times and we have a frame of a panel door ready. Now I would spare you that, I won't make you watch it, so we skip straight to the assembling of the door. When we have a panel door, we only glue the joints. The panel in the middle is free floating for a reason. We have to make sure we leave expansion gap. That way our solid wood frame can expand and contract with the seasonal changes in humidity without damaging our door. Otherwise, if you don't or glue the panel, it would prevent it from moving freely, and that would mean that it would either buckle or twist. That's also the reason why our middle panel is undersized by about 2mm on each side, just so we can give the frame that room to expand and contract with the seasonal changes. Then we put everything together. As you can see, the stiles are oversized, and that is also for a reason, and that's quite a simple one. In case we damage them in the process of clamping or just drop the door or anything, we are going to trim them at a later stage anyway. This is exactly what I'm doing here. It's quite a simple one. Just mark it and then cut them off. You can run them on the table so if you prefer to do so. Now for the purposes of this video, I've decided just to use hand tools, so that's why I didn't want to do that. Then I always clean up my joints with my plane. This one was pretty straightforward, not too much to clean, but none of those joints come out perfect straight away, so that's why we spend a couple of minutes with the plane, just make sure everything is perfect. I always make my doors oversized, so I'm taking a little bit off the style here, and then before I fit them I like to sand them. So I go over these ones, I take them down to 120 before I fit them. Then we get to do the hinges. So the first thing we do is we mark the position of the hinges using a knife, because the knife is much more accurate than a pencil, and then we use a couple of chisels to cut the mortise. So you can see how this is the the process of cutting a hinge mortise. It's exactly the same thing if you want to hang an internal door. It's exactly the same process. On an internal door, I would use a router, especially if I'm doing a lot of internal doors. Easier that way, but this is the process, so you can use that on a bigger door. Then once we cut the mortise, we fit the hinge. Once again, I slightly off-center my screws towards the back so I can put the hinge into the mortise. Then fitting the cabinet door, I have this method of just putting a couple of spacers on the bottom so I can put my door and then mark the position of the hinges. Then that allows me to mark my pilot holes, drill them, and then hang the door. So the interesting thing about these two doors here, you'd see, is that they don't fit properly, and that's by design. I've oversized them by 10 millimeters because I'm going to rebate both the doors, and they would meet in the middle into a rebate. So I'm using my plow plane for said rebate. Now you can use a rebate plane. I do have one. Not a big fan of it. It clogs up with wood shaving, so I've decided to use my plow plane. You can do that with a router. It's probably going to be a lot easier with a router, but again, for the purposes of this video, I solely wanted to use hand tools. So just like the grooves with those rebates, we start from the end of the piece and we work our way backwards until we hit that depth stop that we've set up on the plane. And then we clean up the rebate with a little bit of sandpaper, followed by a decorative bead on the other side of the door. Once again, we start from the end of the piece, work our way backwards. Now this is another great example of a wooden plane that I prefer over its metal counterpart. Actually, all of my molding planes are original from the mid 1800s. And this is how our rebated doors work. So we have this one on that side, we close that one first, the other one goes on top, and the decorative bead is there to hide the fact that one style is slightly thinner than the other. Fast forward a couple of days and I've had it installed and painted on site. So this is me checking the doors, they're working properly and are aligning. One thing is we've designed the baseboard on these units to be mounted with magnets in case access under the cabinets is required. As a thank you to those people who watched to the end, I will tell you the price of this unit was about £1,600, and I would really appreciate if you leave me a comment telling me whether you think this is a cheap, reasonably priced or expensive. I would kindly ask you not to put the price in the comment, that way I would know anyone who's commented has watched the video to the end. As always, thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one.